On October 2nd, 1869, in the coastal town of Porbandar, in the Kathiawar Peninsula of western India, now in the state of Gujarat, a baby boy was born. He was named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. No one could have imagined that this frail, tiny infant would one day become the father of India, revered across the world as the Mahatma, the great soul. Gandhi was born into a prestigious family of administrators. His family belonged to the Vaishya, merchant, caste, but they had risen to high political positions. His grandfather had served as the Dewan, chief minister of the Porbandar state, and his father, Karamchand Gandhi, inherited that position. Though Karamchand had only a basic education, he was known for his administrative skill, honesty, and firm principles. He served as Dewan in 3 states, Porbandar, Rajkot, and Vankuner. Karamchand was in his 4th marriage, and Mohandas was the youngest child of his 4th wife, Putlabai. The little boy was adored by everyone in the family, who lovingly called him Moniya or Manu. Putlabai was a deeply religious and strong-willed woman. She was a devout follower of the Pranami sect, a faith that blended Vaishnavism, devotion to Lord Vishnu, with Islamic influences. She strictly observed religious rituals, often fasting for 2 or 3 days at a time. It was under her influence that Gandhi developed his lifelong commitment to Hindu values, vegetarianism, tolerance, simplicity, and the principle of ahimsa, nonviolence. But Putlabai was not narrow-minded. Karamchand often hosted Parsi and Muslim friends at home, and they would discuss the virtues of their different religions. Young Mohandas, sitting quietly at his father's feet, absorbed these conversations. He grew up in an atmosphere of religious pluralism and tolerance, learning to respect all faiths. The shy, mediocre student. But young Mohandas was by no means a brilliant child. At the age of 7, his family moved to Rajkot, where his father had found employment. He was enrolled in a local school. He was extremely shy and timid. He would run home immediately after school every day, barely speaking to anyone. He later confessed, "I used to be very shy. I would run away from anyone I met. I was afraid of being laughed at." Academically, he was an average student. He was not good at sports, nor did he show any particular talent. He was quiet, unassuming, and kept to himself. Books and lessons were his only companions. But there were 2 things that left an indelible mark on his young mind. The story of Shravan, a lesson in devotion. One day, young Mohandas was taken to see a play based on the story of Shravan, a devoted son who carried his blind, elderly parents on a pilgrimage. He carried them in 2 baskets hung from a pole across his shoulders. Shravan's love and devotion moved little Mohandas deeply. He told himself, "This is the example I must follow." From that moment, he made a silent vow to be as devoted to his own parents as Shravan was to his. The story of Harishchandra, a lesson in truth. Another play left an even more profound impact on him. It was the story of King Harishchandra, a legendary ruler who sacrificed his kingdom, his wealth, and his family to uphold the truth. He faced unimaginable suffering, but he never lied. He never broke his word. Mohandas watched the play over and over again. He wept every time. He asked himself, why can't we all be as truthful as Harishchandra? And he made another promise to himself. He would always speak the truth, no matter the cost. These 2 ideals, devotion to parents and unwavering truthfulness, became the foundation of his entire life. The fearful child. Despite his moral courage, young Mohandas was physically a coward. He was terrified of the dark. He couldn't walk alone in his own house after sunset. He was scared of ghosts, thieves, and snakes. One day, his family's maid, an old woman named Rumba, saw him trembling with fear. She took him aside and said, "Why are you so afraid? You must remember Ram. Ram will always protect you. Fear never comes near those who remember Ram." These simple words stayed with Gandhi his entire life. He began chanting the name of Ram whenever he was scared. Eventually, this mantra became his spiritual anchor, and on the day he died, his last words were, "Hey Ram," the rebellious phase. But Gandhi was not a saint from childhood. Like any other boy, he went through moments of rebellion and temptation. The meat-eating experiment. Since his family was strictly vegetarian, he had never tasted meat. But he was influenced by a friend who told him, "The British are strong because they eat meat. That's why they rule over us." Determined to be strong like the British, Mohandas secretly ate meat for the first time. He felt both thrilled and guilty. He continued for a while, eating meat in secret with his friend, but he was tormented by the thought of lying to his parents. The guilt became unbearable, and he eventually swore off meat forever, vowing never to touch it again. The smoking incident. He also tried smoking as a boy. He didn't enjoy it, but he wanted to look grown up. To buy cigarettes, he stole money from his family. He later regretted it deeply. The gold theft. The most serious childhood mistake came when he stole a small piece of gold from his brother's armlet to help pay off his brother's debts. The guilt consumed him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He couldn't look at his father's face. Finally, he broke down and wrote a confession letter to his father. He handed it to his father with trembling hands, expecting to be beaten or disowned. But something miraculous happened. His father read the letter, wept, and tore it up. He hugged his son and forgave him. Gandhi later wrote, "Those tears of forgiveness washed away my sins. I vowed never to steal again." That moment of unconditional love transformed him forever. He understood that true repentance is not about punishment, but about transformation. The untouchable friend. One of the most beautiful moments of Gandhi's childhood was his friendship with a boy named Ukha, the school's untouchable sweeper. In the rigid caste system of India, Ukha was considered impure, and upper caste children were forbidden from touching him. One day, Mohandas ran to Ukha with a handful of sweets. Ukha warned him, "Don't come too close, young master. I am an untouchable." But Mohandas didn't care. He shoved the sweets into Ukha's hands, his face beaming with innocent defiance. When his mother found out, she was upset. She scolded him. "You must never touch an untouchable. It's against our customs." Mohandas replied, "I don't agree with you, mother. What is wrong with touching Ukha? Is he not the same as me? The same God made us both." His mother was speechless. This was the first spark of Gandhi's lifelong fight against caste discrimination, a battle that began in the playground of a small school in Rajkot. The year was 1919. The First World War had just ended. India, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, had contributed enormously to the war effort, both financially and in manpower. Over 20,000 Indian soldiers had died fighting for Britain. The Indian people naively hoped that Britain would reward their loyalty and sacrifice with some measure of freedom. But the opposite happened. Instead of granting India self-rule, Britain tightened its grip on the colony. To suppress the growing cry for independence, the British colonial government passed the infamous Rowlatt Act. Under this law, the colonial government could imprison anyone without trial for an indefinite period. The rights of the Indian people were completely stripped away. Then came the tragedy. On April 13, 1919, in the city of Amritsar, Punjab, tens of thousands of Indians gathered in a public square to peacefully protest the Rowlatt Act. They were unarmed, no weapons, no hostility. But General Dyer, a British officer, ordered his soldiers to open fire on the crowd. Armored cars rolled into the square, and machine guns rained bullets for 10 minutes. Hundreds fell dead in the blood-soaked square, and many more jumped into a well to escape the bullets. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre shocked the entire Indian subcontinent. Anger burned in every Indian heart. By this time, Gandhi had already emerged as the leader of the Indian National Congress. He had studied law in London and spent years in South Africa, where he witnessed the brutal racism of colonial rule. He had seen the sophistication of Western civilization, but he also deeply loved India and its ancient traditions. When the British colonizers revealed their true face with the massacre, Gandhi saw them clearly for what they were. He made up his mind. He would lead the nation in a fight to the very end. But Gandhi's method of fighting would shock the entire world. Chapter 2. Nonviolent Non-Cooperation, Gandhi's core philosophy. Gandhi knew that India had no powerful army. The Indian people were unarmed. To fight the mightiest empire in the world with violence would be like throwing eggs at a mountain. More importantly, Gandhi firmly believed that violence only breeds hatred and bloodier revenge. He created a form of resistance that had never been seen before, satyagraha, or nonviolent non-cooperation. The word satyagraha comes from two Sanskrit roots, satya, truth, and agraha, holding firmly to. Its true meaning is holding firmly to truth. Gandhi believed that the power of truth, not the power of violence, was the most potent weapon for changing the world. What did this mean in practice? Gandhi's strategy was simple but devastatingly effective. All Indians should cut off every possible connection with the British. He called upon the Indian people to resign from all government posts and titles awarded by the British, return all medals and honors conferred by the British Crown, boycott all official government functions and ceremonies, leave British-run schools and colleges and establish their own national institutions, refuse to appear in British courts and set up their own arbitration systems, boycott British goods and refuse to wear British-made clothing, refuse to pay taxes to the British government, stop depositing money in British banks, and stop buying British bonds. Stop working in British factories and businesses. In addition, there were hunger strikes, silent vigils, peaceful gatherings, and protest marches, all conducted without a hint of violence. Gandhi's goal was to make British rule in India impossible. If Indians refused to cooperate in any way, the British could not rule India. This non-cooperation was not passive withdrawal. It was active, organized, and peaceful resistance. To set an example for all Indians, in 1920, Gandhi publicly returned the honors and titles that the British government had awarded him. The nonviolent non-cooperation movement had begun. Chapter 3. The First Non-Cooperation Movement, 1920 to 1922. On September 4, 1920, Gandhi officially launched the first nationwide non-cooperation movement. It was the first countrywide nonviolent resistance campaign in human history. The whole of India exploded. Government officials resigned. Indians stopped working for the British colonial administration. Students left their schools. Thousands upon thousands of young Indians walked out of British-run institutions and set up their own national schools and universities. Lawyers stopped practicing. They refused to appear in British courts. Workers went on strike. Factories and industries across the country ground to a halt. The Swadeshi, home products, movement began. Gandhi called upon Indians to spin their own cloth and weave their own garments, rejecting British-made textiles. Public bonfires of British cloth were held across the nation. Hindus and Muslims united. For the first time in centuries, the two communities set aside their differences and joined hands in a common cause. The British were thrown into confusion. The administrative, judicial, and educational systems of the colonial government were almost completely paralyzed. When the Prince of Wales visited India, he was met with complete boycotts in Bombay. But tragedy struck on February 5, 1922. In the village of Chayuri Chowra, thousands of angry peasants clashed with police. In the violence that erupted, 22 policemen were burned alive. The principle of nonviolence had been broken. Gandhi was devastated. He immediately convened an emergency session of the Indian National Congress and indefinitely suspended the entire non-cooperation movement. The decision baffled many, even angered them. The movement was reaching its peak. Why stop now? Gandhi's answer was clear. If the principle of nonviolence is violated, the movement loses its soul. He would rather suspend the movement than allow India to slide into the abyss of violence. The first non-cooperation movement ended, but it had already dealt a crushing blow to British colonial rule and awakened the political consciousness of millions of Indians. Chapter 4. The Salt March, the Walk That Shook the World, 1930. Several years later, the world plunged into a massive economic crisis, the Great Depression. To shift the burden of the crisis, Britain intensified its exploitation of India. This time, Britain targeted salt. The colonial government passed the Salt Monopoly Act, which decreed that only government-designated shops could sell salt, and they had to levy heavy taxes on it. Indians were forbidden from producing or selling their own salt. They were forced to buy expensive imported salt. Salt was a basic necessity for every human being, consumed daily by rich and poor alike. For the poor of India, the salt tax was an unbearable burden. The law sparked widespread anger and resentment. Gandhi decided to launch another non-cooperation movement. He presented the British Indian authorities with 11 demands, including reduce land taxes, abolish the salt monopoly, and release political prisoners. When these demands were rejected, Gandhi launched the most famous campaign of his life, the Salt March. On March 12, 1930, a 60-year-old Gandhi, accompanied by a small band of followers, set out from his ashram in Ahmedabad. They marched on foot, heading for the coastal village of Dandi, 390 kilometers away. Their mission, to walk to the sea, collect salt, and refuse to buy British salt. Gandhi walked through village after village, spreading his message of nonviolent resistance. He endured sun, wind, dust, and insects, but he never complained. After 24 days of walking, the group had swelled to over 1,000 people. When Gandhi reached the shores of Dandi, he bent down and picked up a handful of salt from the beach. This simple act was a direct challenge to the British salt monopoly, a declaration of defiance. Gandhi and his followers remained at the seaside for 3 weeks. Every morning, they would pray, then collect seawater and boil it, evaporate it, filter it, and produce salt. For Gandhi, who had undergone many hunger strikes and was in fragile health, the exhausting labor of salt making was grueling. But he never shied away, participating in the work personally until his arrest. India was set ablaze. All along the coastline, Indians responded to Gandhi's call, making their own salt. Across the country, strikes, boycotts, protests, and petitions erupted. The colonial authorities panicked, arresting Gandhi and other Congress leaders and outlawing the Indian National Congress. But repression only fueled greater resistance. In Dandi, the poetess Sarojini Naidu led 2,500 volunteers to march on the massive salt works at Darasena. Journalists captured a scene that shocked the world. The Gandhians marched forward in silence. A selected group of volunteers stepped forward from the crowd, crossed the ditches, and approached the barbed wire. Suddenly, on command, a large contingent of Indian police rushed toward the advancing protesters, raining down iron-tipped batons on their heads. Not a single protester raised a hand to defend himself. They fell like bowling pins, but the protesters kept advancing until they were beaten down. The courage and sacrifice of the nonviolent protesters shook the conscience of the world. International pressure on Britain became overwhelming. In April of the same year, under immense public and global pressure, the British colonial government agreed to abolish the Salt Monopoly Act. Gandhi's non-cooperation movement had achieved a historic victory. Chapter 5. The Quit India Movement. The Final Stand, 1942. The year was 1942. The Second World War was at its fiercest. Britain desperately needed India's full support to fight the Axis powers. London sent a mission led by Sir Stafford Cripps to India, hoping to secure Indian support in exchange for vague promises of future self-government. But the Cripps mission's proposals were far from satisfactory. They failed to meet India's demand for immediate independence. Gandhi sensed that the time was right for a decisive showdown. On August 8, 1942, at the Galia Tank Maidan in Bombay, Gandhi stood before a massive gathering of Indians and delivered one of the most electrifying speeches in modern history. He issued the most uncompromising, thunderous call of his life. Quit India. His rallying cry was simple and urgent. Do or die. This was Gandhi at his most radical. He demanded that Britain immediately end its colonial rule over India. Within 24 hours of Gandhi's speech, the British colonial government launched a massive crackdown. Almost all the top leaders of the Congress were arrested and thrown into prison. Gandhi himself was placed under house arrest at the Aga Khan Palace in Pune. However, the arrest of the leaders only intensified the movement. Across the nation, protests, strikes, and demonstrations exploded with even greater ferocity. Factories shut down. Schools closed. Shops pulled down their shutters. India was paralyzed. The British colonial authorities responded with brutal suppression. Hundreds were killed, and over 100,000 people were arrested. But this time, the British also realized with certainty their rule over India could no longer be sustained. In 1944, Gandhi was released. He continued his protests and hunger strikes, unwavering in his commitment to the struggle. After the end of the Second World War, a weary and depleted British Empire was no longer capable of maintaining its colonial grip over India. Chapter 6: Victory, the Empire Exits. On August 15, 1947, India declared its independence. Gandhi did not attend the grand independence celebrations. That day, he sat in a modest room in Calcutta, spinning his cotton wheel and praying for harmony between Hindus and Muslims. He had defeated the mightiest empire in the world, without firing a single bullet, without shedding a drop of his enemy's blood. His weapons were truth, love, and persistence. As Gandhi once said, "An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind." He chose a completely different path, one where India's soft power crushed Britain's brute force. He proved to the world that nonviolence is not a sign of weakness, but the most powerful weapon of all. Epilogue: a flame that never dies. Gandhi's struggle against Britain was not merely a political campaign. It was a spiritual awakening. He made 300 million Indians believe that, even without weapons, they could defeat an empire. He taught the world that the power of truth and love will always triumph over hatred and oppression. Gandhi's influence extended far beyond India. Martin Luther King Jr. drew inspiration from his philosophy of nonviolence during the American Civil Rights Movement. Nelson Mandela was deeply influenced by him in his fight against apartheid in South Africa. From a shy, timid boy who was afraid of the dark, Gandhi grew into the Mahatma, the great soul who shook the world. His method of struggle changed humanity's understanding of what it means to be strong. He proved that true strength lies not in what you can destroy, but in what you can build. Not in how many enemies you can conquer, but in how many hearts you can win. Truth is eternal. Love is universal. Together, they're the most powerful force in the world. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.